Let's get straight to the point. There'll be no soft introduction with clever or flowery prose to ease you gently into the topic. The title of the video says enough. We don't need game publishers anymore. Here I will state my reasons why I think this is so. Publishers have become a blight on the gaming industry as a whole. Is it necessary for me to clarify this in light of everyday evidence? You need only look at their corrupting influence on developers and the resulting games they produce, laden with microtransactions and stripped-out features sold as DLC. You need only look at most articles and public forums about a publisher to observe the cynicism, distrust, and contempt the average consumer from the vocal minority will harbor towards them. You need only look at the steady decline of creativity and originality over the last 10 or more years in favor of safe, homogeneous, by-the-numbers titles that are force-fed to us through a carefully crafted, artificially generated hype. You need only look at how publishers are trying to normalize games as a service, in a transparent attempt to justify the continuous release of unfinished products with additional transactions built into the core experience, to wring all the money they can from you while you smile and thank them for offering you the choice. Is there really a decline, though? Or perhaps you are just being cynical and unaccepting of a changing environment that you can't keep up with? A voice of opposition may state. Yes, there really has been a huge decline. To be clear, the definition of decline in this context is a gradual and continuous loss of strength, numbers, quality, or value. And here I'm speaking of the value, and to some extent, strength and quality. But value is subjective. We all extract personal value in differing ways and amounts. This is just your opinion, not truth, the opposition retorts. Correct, this is just my subjective opinion, as is nearly everything else a human being may ever utter. You are no more above this fact than I. What will determine its strength and truth is how many others will hear and resonate with it. So hear me out, and decide for yourself how much truth I speak. We don't need game publishers anymore. Why not? Because they were born from a necessity that is no longer a concern for the industry. They are now obsolete. But in order to stay relevant, they are trying to cement themselves within the identity of the games they help publish by acquiring or even making game studios, creating the impression in consumers and developers alike that without them, the game they love would simply cease to be. But this is not true. At its most basic, a publisher's original function was to help manufacture, market, and distribute a physical game by covering the associated costs and taking responsibility for those duties and other logistical and bureaucratic things, allowing the developers to focus on what they want to do, making games. At its most simplistic and ideal, this used to be a good thing. The added financial investment of the publisher meant that developers had extra funding to add features that would have been otherwise impossible, and the imposition of a reasonable deadline for release could help to keep them focused and use their time more efficiently. But that rarely, if ever, is simply the case nowadays. It later became more commonplace for publishers to help finance the development process itself, meaning they then had a fiscal interest and a direct hand in how the actual experience of the game was shaped. This financial support gradually became more and more integral to the actual completion of the game itself. Larger publishers began to offer core elements of support to developers, such as sound design and code packages, all under the guise of enticing the developer, whose job would be made theoretically easier and more efficient as a result. And whilst I'm sure it did help, the developer agreeing to this, unknowingly or not, had allowed the creative integrity of their studio to be compromised, and over time descend gradually into a state of complete submission and dependence on their publisher. Suddenly, their creative vision and motivations have become intertwined and reliant on an organization whose primary motivation first and foremost is to turn a profit. And contrary to how they present themselves, that is exactly what publishers are and always have been. Their original involvement in the gaming industry has only ever been successful distribution and promotion of the game that they have entered into a contract with, so that they may turn a profit with its success. Never has the artistic integrity, depth of experience, richness of story and lore, or even rewarding gameplay been of the slightest concern to the publisher. Their sole motivation is greed and profit, nothing more, nothing less. They attempt to dress up this simplistic motivation with empty platitudes, a vocal facade offering experiences, services, and evolution. Their spokespeople speak on public stages of their passion for the industry and their dedication to the fans who make it all possible, all the while feeding the audience carefully chosen buzzwords and phrases, hollow, meaningless statements peppered with agreeable and relevant adjectives, of which were carefully vetted beforehand by statisticians who observe public discourse and feed back to their corporate masters what manner of communication is statistically most likely to generate a resonance with their customers. All of this is done to create excitement and anticipation through the idealism of the spoken words rather than what the product itself actually is, no different to the empty words of a typical politician. But most of all, this is done to show you that they are listening to the community, to you. Oh, and they certainly are listening. They will be watching discussion on public forums like a hawk, no doubt also using employees to incite them, collating collective opinion and weighing it against past and present sales figures to better gauge how far they can push their next profit-driven scheme into the next big game release. This is why your games have been getting shorter and progressively dumbed down, having their features slowly and methodically stripped out, only then to be repackaged and sold to us all under the guise of providing a service. You know what I'm speaking of. DLC, loot boxes, microtransactions. I don't need to explain their insidious nature to you. You already innately understand it. You already know that the vast majority of what they offer used to be included for free as part of the core experience. You know that games used to be made as feature-complete as possible so that you, the customer, could get the most complete experience. But this was before publishers dug their claws deep into the industry, rooting itself onto the core of development and infecting it with its insatiable greed. They were able to do this back then because the means for developers to distribute and advertise their product were limited. They lacked the experience and/or the funds, so they turned to publishers. And the result in our games is what we see today. Greed. Ever-increasing greed. More and more games, new releases, old beloved franchises being gutted into a shell and having those contents sold back to us in the most psychologically manipulative manner that can be gotten away with at the time. We, the consumer, the customer, are having our limits of tolerance constantly pushed, little by little, but not quite to breaking point, to gradually wean us into accepting this practice as norm. Sometimes it seems we're being pushed close to the edge, that the publisher has gone too far. The consumer protest gets louder, and the publisher seems to recoil and backtrack on a certain unfavorable idea. It seems our voices have finally been heard, our displeasure understood. But in reality, all we observe is a carefully planned display of apparent generosity in the form of a one-off, slightly lessened, exploitative attitude towards us. We applaud and cheer this magnanimity. They finally listen to us, we think, and a feeling of quiet satisfaction dwells within us for a short while. But in actuality, the despondence that was growing within us, which might have pushed us enough to forego buying the next title or boycott the company altogether, has been successfully quelled by this minor act. Hope arises in you once more that things may get better, but in truth, you've merely been subjugated once again. Your energy spent resisting the injustice before is now slightly lessened evermore, and future resistance from you is weaker and less likely. In the end, after so much protesting, you become accepting. Your despondency, once directed at the companies themselves, is now aimed at your fellow customers. encouraging them to give up the same old tired fight that elicits no meaningful change within the industry. Just make the best of it as you can, for that's the way things are now. Your thoughts console you and others. But here's the thing. These practices are not a necessary evil that we must put up with. We don't need game publishers anymore. The industry is absolutely not reliant on their practices to exist and thrive. We don't need their embodiment of relentless greed and profit-chasing to be the primary driving force of the mainstream gaming industry. Developers, you no longer need them. Customers, gamers, we no longer have to tolerate their corrupting influence on our beloved medium. We live in an age of instant information transfer, reaching hundreds of thousands of people within minutes, even seconds. An age where distribution can happen worldwide at the touch of a button, without the need for physical production costs and resource use. An age where advertising can be quickly and efficiently placed to target a worldwide audience. But most importantly, we live in an age where a product of creativity can be shared, scrutinized, given value and funded directly, not by some intermediary corporation, but by the customer themselves. Using the many tools already available and established, if your product resonates with your target audience, then they and other prospective customers will curate, advertise, fund, alpha test, beta test, write guides, develop mods, create forums, and even develop your world through fan fiction and creation, all by their own initiative and passion that your product inspires within them, completely for free. This passion from the players is currently exploited at large by the big corporations, developer and publisher alike. But it need not be a case of exploitation. Why not instead make it a respectful collaboration? As a developer, all you have to do is begin your creation, share your vision with us, and if your intention is pure and the strength of your idea is real, we will know, and we, the customers, will willingly give you our support every step of the way until your vision is finally realized, for both our pleasures. The tools are here and ready to use right now. Online distribution platforms, crowdfunding initiatives, social media and sharing, early access schemes, free game development software. It's all there, easy to use, and without a hand of greed controlling and stifling your creative and innovative vision. Unlike a corporation, which ultimately becomes a collective embodiment of the pursuit of greed and profit, the individual person generally derives meaning and satisfaction from service and passion. If you take a little time to put your product into our gaze, and we see its worth, like a snowball gaining traction and size as it rolls downhill, we will take care of you and keep you honest. Your passion becomes our passion, and we will help you drive it forward. You no longer need a publisher to do and share this with us. We, you and I, can now directly work together, free of corporate interests. None of this is dreamy, idealistic fantasy. It can be done readily, and has already been proven so. To both customers and developers, let go of obsolete, irrelevant companies that poison our passions with greed and manipulation. If we want this behavior to stop, we must take responsibility and control of the amazing tools we have created to share ourselves with one another. We have, and always will, hold the power to dictate the conditions of the world around us. You, me, us, hold this power, not faceless corporate entities born of a singular simplistic desire. Now more than ever, with our interconnected world, we have this power at our fingertips. We just have to accept and take on responsibility and ownership of this power together. Responsibility is not a burden. It is a liberation and is nothing to be feared. The deceptive, exploitative, money-grabbing practices that publishers inject into our games more and more is completely unnecessary. It is not an evil we have to live with. They are not integral to the success of gaming and their franchises. Not anymore. We do not need game publishers and their poisonous anti-consumer influence within the industry anymore. Reject them and their ways. Embrace principle and standard. We must make sure our future and our children's future is not overshadowed and consumed by this greed that will only get worse and worse if we let it go unchecked.